holiday.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good. I'm just getting over coming back off holiday and thinking, oh, back to the grindstone, I guess.
Post-holiday blues?
A little bit. I haven't even posted my photos from my holiday yet, which I think I should.
Yeah.
So yes, I think we should just get stuck in, unless you've got anything you want to share, anything about your week.
I'll be looking forward to seeing those pictures.
Oh yeah.
Caledonia.
When they finally get out. I'm just trying to think if there's anything I did. Oh, I have got some exciting news, but it's kind of on the down low at the minute. I may be writing some articles for a business magazine.
Oh, that's amazing. Is this an exclusive we're hearing?
Oh, I don't know. It's exclusive. I've been invited to write some articles. I'm going to wait and see whether they get accepted, and then it'll be celebratory. But it's celebratory in itself that I've even been noticed to be invited. So I have you to thank for that, Bhavna.
Why so? How so?
Because you...
Based on your merit and your hard work.
No, based on this podcast. Because without you, I wouldn't be doing this podcast, because I feel it works by having a partner, a co-host, who can articulate the problems and have open discussions and be vulnerable and give their opinions wholeheartedly and share their own experiences. And that's the co-host I look for. And that's what makes this podcast great. And so thank you for being my co-host. And this is what got noticed. This is what got me noticed. And this is what got me the invitation. So thank you.
I'm honoured to be the co-host. And if I'm contributing to the message and the purpose, then I'm more than happy to be involved. So thank you for the opportunity, Tracy.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. And with that, should we jump in to our first story?
Let's jump in. It's the story, because it's been quite topical. And I'm actually don't know where I stand on this. Probably because I'd need to educate myself more on the topic. But it's very much in the news a lot at the moment. And this story is about how world sport got into a mess over trans athletes. So it's about the whole debate about trans athletes. And it's been quite topical. And I remember my mum was here. When she was here, she was like, oh, I don't know. She was even going, oh, I don't know if I agree with that. And my first response is why? Because my first response is to be as inclusive as possible and to not have people they're not fitting somewhere. What we already have separate men and women we already do that. We already separate based on gender. And so we do that. And then now we have people that have changed their gender, and to not allow them to compete and be on a world stage and have their talent shown in that gender category seems unfair. However, when you read some of the things that are out in the press at the minute, it's like, oh, it makes you think. So let's tell this story.
Yes, I'm interested in hearing more about this, because I also had a conversation about this not so long ago, very similar to your mum's probably perspective, where I was hearing a perspective that was shared to me, and it made me look at this issue in a different light. We'll come to that, and
come to that.
Let's hear what the article says.
So how world sport got into a mess over trans athletes and how it can get out of it. So world sport has been convulsed over the past few months, indeed years, by questions about trans athletes, especially trans women, competing in their required gender. Now, before I go on, I'll just say this is in a news source called The Conversation, which is actually quite good. I've seen a few things in here. So most recently, World Athletics announced its preferred option of a reduced 2.5 nanomole testosterone limit for trans women to compete, with a final decision due on March 23. So yesterday, basically. So by the time this episode goes out, the decision will have already been made. So for me, it's really interesting that they almost make a definition of a woman or female competitor is based on their testosterone levels. Okay, and this is what the article says. Other sporting bodies have proposed stricter eligibility rules, including the Rugby Football Union, the Rugby Football League, the British Triathlon and British Athletics, based on excluding male advantage gains through puberty or immunization, which is the process leading to irreversible muscular, skeletal and cardiovascular changes at puberty from female competition. So I guess the suggestion is then that it's not just the testosterone limit, but then if you've gone through puberty, the suggestion is that you have muscular, skeletal and cardiovascular, I guess, characteristics that are typical of male and maybe an advantage of a female. Yeah, so that's the suggestion. I don't know if it's true, but that's a suggestion. So like British athletes, British Triathlon said it wanted an open category for all individuals, including male, male and female, transgender, and those non-binary who were male sex at birth. While World Aquatics will make trans women athletes ineligible from competing in elite women's swimming and diving, saying fairness was non-negotiable. So tensions are still very apparent, but there are some signs with these new policies of a shift on global policy, from one based on testosterone levels to one based on male advantage acquired at puberty. And it is clear that the terrain has been shifting from the terrain of science to the terrain of ethics. So I'm not going to read all of the article, but you can see that there's different perceptions on what is fair. Okay, what I did read in this article, which I felt was quite interesting, is the attempt to re-engineer the idea of what is fair, what's fair competition. Because some argue that even though trans women have residual male advantages, it can still be reasonable for them to compete in the female category. It's still meaningful competition. And it's like, well, what's fair competition or meaningful competition? And the International Olympic Committee, which follows the specific researchers, namely Joanna Harper and Yanis, have given its blessing to the twin ideas of meaningful competition and disproportionate advantage in its policy documents. So the general idea is that if the advantage held by trans women is sufficiently small so that they won't win all the time, then it is permissible and meaningful for them to compete in the female category. So there you go. And there's a lot more in here. It's a very interesting article. I guess it's about advantage, because even within one gender, there's advantages, because you might just be stronger, not maybe based on skill, maybe, and like, for example, I'll give you one example that the first thing that comes to mind, because at high school, I was pushed into sport because I'm Black. I did, yeah, because a lot of Black people have, yeah.
You were pushed into...
Well, I enjoyed sport anyway, but I was pushed into competitive sport.
Sorry, I'm laughing because was the school open about this? Like, oh, you're Black, so you'll be good at sport. No. So that's how I was reading that. Sorry.
I mean, it has been suggested. However, it's a stereotype that can be true. Yeah. Because a lot of Black athletes are very good at certain sports, and it's a genetic thing. So that's true. Like, it's like muscle, whatever. I'm not the expert. I was good at sport.
Yeah, it made me laugh because I thought it was being overtly.
It wasn't overtly suggested. However, I was good at athletics, so it was implied that I could go somewhere with that. Right?
Yeah, you encouraged because obviously there was enthusiasm shown around the sport.
Yeah. But it's true. There's some truth to that Black athletes are particularly good at some sports. There's a genetic reason for that. So would you say, all right, Black people have to have their own category in these sports because they've got an unfair advantage? Do you know what I mean? So this is the ideas going on around in my head. It's like, what's fair? What's fair competition?
Okay, so I have to say, this issue, the reason why I'm smiling and the reason why I'm glad that this has come up as a feature in this podcast, because this whole area, this whole terrain is a minefield, which is the reason why it's causing so much opposition when it comes to views on this. Only a few weeks ago, I was asking a friend of mine about this, about why is there so much opposition and views around this. And he asked me about this, and he asked me to put myself in a perspective where he said, if you imagine you're a female athlete and you have been training your whole life to be an Olympian, and that's what you are trained to be. That's what you enjoy we're doing, and that's what you've been trained to be, as many Olympians are. They have trained pretty much their entire life. And then let's say you're a runner, and let's say then in the next few months, it's been announced that the category has been opened to transgender, and you'll now be competing with another female who is trans, who is physically different or has been different to you. Like, for example, and the example he went on to further give me was of Caitlyn Jenner. So he asked me to imagine you're a female who has been training all her life to be this Olympian level, and it's been announced that Caitlyn Jenner will be competing in your category. Maybe I don't know enough about what's required for training to be an Olympian, but my thoughts automatically, I'm sharing this with you here on a podcast, my thoughts when I was asked to imagine this my thoughts automatically went to, oh, I would feel uncomfortable about that. That's where my thoughts went.
For what reason?
Because I was thinking, well, if I'm a female who's been training for this accolade all my life, and then somebody who has known physicality, which is a lot stronger than me, biologically not stronger than me, who would have been in a different category, in a men's category, has now jumped into a female category because of identification. That's a massive impact on what I've been training for, because in training, you are comparing and working within that female biological boundary. Then have that open up to someone like Caitlyn Jenner, whose physicality is by far a major difference to my female category. It would make me feel uncomfortable. My first reaction is, and I'm being honest here, is imagining if I was a female athlete who had trained and dedicated my entire life and then been told Caitlyn Jenner was going to be in my category. Yes, I would find that a little bit uncomfortable.
Yeah, I get it.
And that's why, and I think that's where I'm voicing the other.
I get it.
I'm pleased that I'm able to give to that group of athletes, female athletes, who have trained all their life and are now facing the possibility of then having this kind of altered, because they have to now be inclusive of someone like Caitlyn Jenner.
I get that. I don't know, to be honest, I don't know enough. I know who Caitlyn Jenner is, but I don't know the specifics of their transformation, let's just say.
Bruce Jenner, he's a triathlon.
Oh, I know that historically he was a sporting, yeah, I get that. I totally get that.
And that's why that example was pretty spot on, really. I really liked that. I mean, I liked being challenged mentally, especially when it comes to imagining the situation. I thought that was a really great one to be. It's like, imagine if I was, I'm of color, I'm of female origin, and I've worked really hard, I've trained myself to be this Olympian athlete. And if I was told that in the next category, the next season, Caitlyn Jenner will be in my category, I was just imagining it.
Yeah, got it.
It didn't make me feel celebratory.
I get it. I get with that specific scenario. And the thing is, let's look at that scenario. It's making lots of assumptions, isn't it? Well, first of all, I don't know how often that you would be competing where you've already competing against somebody that has already proven track record of excellence like that. Usually in competition, you're all in competition. Yeah, you might have won that competition, you might have won that competition. But that example, I get why he used that example, because it's good. It helps you see where the fear comes from or the sense of unfairness comes from, right? Absolutely. But then you've got to think, right, well, what are we assuming then? We're assuming, they've changed their sex, but haven't surgically changed their gender? Like how much of the gender has been transformed? Is it on the surface? Is it in hormones? Is it in surgery? Like what level? And we're also assuming that they've got exactly the same physical ability as they did when they were identifying as a man than they now identify as a woman. That's another thing we're probably assuming. So that's why we need to have science to address these types of questions, because we don't know that.
But I think that's why, yes, I understand that there is assumptions around an imaginary situation. But however, let's take Caitlyn Jenner as an example. I mean, this is a perfect example. Let's take Caitlyn Jenner is trans. That's fact. Are we now to say, if we question, would Caitlyn Jenner be able to compete as a female Olympian now? That's not an assumption, so that's a question.
No, I'm not changing that. I'm changing the assumption.
I'm putting it out there. Would Caitlyn Jenner be able to compete now as a female Olympian?
Maybe, I don't know. That questions still apply. What are the assumptions about their ability, their skill? Like, what are the assumptions, and are they true? The assumptions are still there.
Yeah, and but even with the assumptions, let's take Caitlyn Jenner. So if Caitlyn Jenner was to express interest in furthering the Olympian path,
yes,
which category would Caitlyn Jenner now be in? And if she was placed in the female category, what impact and how would it make the other females in that category feel? That would be really interesting to know.
It would be interesting, and that's what I mean when I'm talking about, well, what would their beliefs and assumptions be about that decision, about that person? It's still the same. So will they believe, well, that person is far stronger than me? Is that true now they have gone through the transformation? That's my question. I don't know. Do you know? Like, we don't know. And that's why I'm saying I'm not the expert. I would look to science to inform me instead of assuming, because it's easy to assume that
this article that's originated this discussion.
Yeah.
It's still saying that science is still trying to uncover what differences or what attributes are lost when there is the occurrence of transgender experience.
Or what's the advantage? It's more like, what advantage are they retaining? That's more the kind of question. Is what advantage are they retaining? And it might be that solution, which is also suggested in the article, is that there's a third category.
Yeah.
That might be the solution.
I actually like the idea of a third category, because I suppose it's because of that example that I was given, is that as a female athlete training all my life, I would see it as an unfair advantage.
But, I mean, the other thing you're suggesting is the trans person hasn't been training all their life and wanting the same thing. And if they're trans, is it fair to, and they identify as a woman, is it fair to put them in man's competition?
This is where the discussion widens out in terms of what's defined as a female, even after trans. I think this is the core of the discussion, where that's why it's causing so much division.
And I'll openly admit, I'm still on the fence, because I think that you have to be informed by the science, but it might also mean that the best option is to have a third category.
I really like the idea of a third category, just not hearing that from the article.
But then also maybe we need to see, because the fears that are driving this discussion are that they retain an advantage if they were born a man and have changed to a woman, retain an advantage from the male body. That's the assumption that drives the fear of unfairness.
But at the moment, science hasn't proven that it's not.
Well, has it? I mean, even if whether it has or it hasn't, people will agree with it or disagree with it. And the only way to know for sure is to see it in action.
Yeah.
That's the only way you know.
Science hasn't
proved it. But the only way you prove science is by actual practical doing and getting the results.
If there's muscle definition before and I'm focusing on Caitlyn Jenner here, or Caitlyn Jenner, if there was muscle definition with Bruce Jenner, after transgender, there's still muscle definition with Caitlyn Jenner.
Yeah. And is it the same? Has it gone down?
There isn't any physical, it may have gone down, but there's training, which is Caitlyn Jenner. Caitlyn Jenner has been training all her life. Her previous life was as an athlete. So if I
So
was,
she's got the cardiovascular benefits as
if I
well.
was a female athlete, I wouldn't need much science to assure me that there is still an advantage that Caitlyn Jenner has if she was in my category after transgender. It's clear to see. And so that's why I'm not convinced about waiting for science. So, and that's why I like the third category.
Yeah. Well, yeah, like I said, you don't necessarily need to wait for science. You can call it science. Even if the science wasn't there, you're still not going to know. You're only going to assume. The only way to know is to do. Because you're always going to get, even in your own category, somebody that's stronger than you, somebody that's fitter than you. That's the whole point, and that's why it's competition.
But not if it's a different gender by birth. That's what this discussion is about.
Well, then it's like saying that it's not possible to have a man that's not as strong as a woman.
Not necessarily. Again, I'm focusing on Caitlyn Jenner here. So
yeah.
Caitlyn Jenner has been let's say if Caitlyn Jenner was put in my category and I was a female Olympian, it would be clear that there is an advantage that Caitlyn Jenner has. And you don't need to wait for science to prove that.
I'm not saying you do. I'm saying, are all men stronger than all women? That's my question. I mean, I don't believe that. Even trained women, trained men, I don't believe that all men, whether they're athletes or not, are stronger than all women. That I don't believe that. Maybe you believe that. I just don't believe that. And you might be, you're right. Could be completely unfair.
Yeah, I don't believe that all men are stronger than all women. Of course I don't. I'm a logical thinker. I don't believe that. I mean, I'm focusing on the Caitlyn Jenner situation. And maybe it's a case of every singular instance of an Olympian, trans Olympian, needs to be taken case by case.
Maybe, yeah, maybe. And maybe we need a third category. Then would it be a case, if there was a third category, that you would have men and women wanting to compete in that category? And would that be okay? That would be another big...
That's why it's a minefield and a question over whether or not it's all got out of hand.
Maybe. All right. Good. See, really good. Very topical.
Yeah, exactly. Definitely. I'm glad we covered it. The story that I've got to share in this week's podcast, a very short one actually. It's I was actually watching the news and I actually saw this on a news article. It was on a TV news feature, and then I actually saw it referenced by the Global Herald. It was a story about the lack of female statues that are in Sydney. There was a Sydney councillor, bringing awareness to this, and basically I'll read the article so you can see.
What's it in the article?
So the article is from the Global Herald.
Okay.
And it says 9 News Australia published this video item entitled "Councillor Questions Enormously Large Number of Male Statues in Sydney." So it's from 9 News Australia. In the description, it says, City of Sydney Councillor Linda Scott has described Sydney's statue situation as a sausage fest, questioning why there are so many male statues and so few female. So it refers to obviously a video, which our viewers can watch if they log on to the Global Herald. And in this 9 News Australia video, so we've got the councillor who's basically highlighted that there's not enough female statues in Sydney, and it's not a good representation of female leadership in Australia. And one of the statues in the news article, on the TV news article, was about Queen Victoria, the Queen Victoria statue, which is situated outside Town Hall Station. And apparently this statue was actually built in the late 1800s, early 1900s in Northern Ireland. And Northern Ireland didn't want him. So they shipped it across the seas and it landed here in Sydney, and it is now in Town Hall Station. So yeah, I don't know whether or not anyone has noticed the lack of female.
Is that the only female statue?
That is, yes.
To be honest, I only notice now that you're highlighting it. But that's because I don't pay attention to statues.
This is the thing, and that's what this councillor was saying, was about awareness and unconscious bias that's being represented in our Sydney suburbs.
But it's not
statues.
It's not really a surprise, is it? Come on. I mean, who do we put in statues? We put statues, the leaders, the heads of state, the political figures. These are the people that become statues.
Mhm.
And let's be honest, in history, which kind of leaders are we celebrating? Generally the men, and they've been mostly in those positions.
But that's just it. This is why the council have been saying this. It's quite interesting because in that TV, in 9 Network TV interview feature that they had, they ended up going around the mic and randomly asking some passers-by if there were female statues, who would you want them? And a few people said Marie Claire. A few of actually, do you know who else one of the top names that were coming up with?
What?
Gladys Berejiklian.
Who?
Gladys Berejiklian.
Oh, Gladys.
The lady who took us through our COVID period.
Right.
Apparently, there should be a statue erected of her, people were saying.
Okay.
So that it did make me think. I was like, and as you just mentioned, and I know that I'm referencing a podcast that we had for International Women's Day, you know, we took the time to celebrate the great speeches of female historical figures. And those are some of the figures that we could have statues of in Sydney. So isn't it great? Like, this is exactly what this lady councillor was
saying
in this article.
Yeah, but you know, there would be uproar if you tried to get rid of any of those statues.
I found it so hilarious when they said that, oh, the Queen Victoria building was donated by Northern Ireland after they didn't want her.
Well, I'm not surprised Northern Ireland didn't want her because, you know, the fighting about the British having that part of the island was massive. So that's not surprising. But is she the only female statue? Wow.
What comes to mind, yeah. But that was interesting, I thought, and that's why I thought I'd include it in this podcast.
You know what I'd like to see, though, in Australia? More Indigenous people of note to be in statues. I think that would be really beautiful.
And I think that's what also cascaded. That's also the comment that also cascaded from this feature was that there aren't any statues of Indigenous leaders or thought provokers around Australia, and there's not enough women. So yeah, female and Indigenous.
Yeah, I think so, because really, you know, you can recognize the past, and you should always acknowledge and recognize the past, because it's how you've got where you are today, and those people influenced it. But it doesn't mean we have to celebrate them. Are they worth celebrating? Maybe they're not, but maybe we can set a new view from the future with other people, like more women and more Indigenous people who we want to celebrate. So in 50, 100 years time, and the statues are still there, it's reflective of more of the inclusive society that we want to have, if that's what we want to have, of course. But I think if that's what you want in the future, then that's a good place to make a change. You're right. I thought it was a really good point. Good story. And while we're on that story, because we just had our Prime Minister in Australia talk about the referendum that's going to happen towards the end of the year. And it's about adding an Indigenous voice to the Parliament, you know, to decision making of how Australians live. And the Indigenous community are, I think it's like 4% of the, not very big, but, you know, still they are the original community, and they're part of this community that don't have a voice at the table.
It's incredible, isn't it? It's the OG community that is voiceless.
Yeah. So apparently I didn't see this, but the Prime Minister gave a very emotional speech as he read out the questions that have been agreed to have at this referendum. And he says, I do feel a weight of responsibility. It is a risk having a referendum. They usually don't succeed. If you were just about positioning on politics as usual, I might not do this. But the people here can't wait. And that's apparently what Albanese said, referring to the Indigenous leaders. And they've waited so long. The people who aren't here, like Noel Pearson and others, they've waited a long time for justice. This is about justice. So this is the proposed law, the question. To alter the Constitution to recognise the First Peoples of Australia by establishing an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice. Do you approve this proposed alteration? So that's going to be part of the referendum. And then the alteration is Chapter 10, Recognition of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Peoples, 129, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Voice. In recognition of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the first peoples of Australia, there shall be a body to be called the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Voice. The Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Voice may make representations to the Parliament and the executive government of the Commonwealth on matters relating to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island peoples. And the Parliament shall, subject to this constitution, have power to make laws with respect to matters relating to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Voice, including its composition, functions, powers, and procedures. And that's the referendum that we all get to participate in.
Yeah, I think I didn't see it myself either, but I saw that Anthony Albanese was really quite emotionally. He probably never imagined he would have to be in a position, whether it be him or anyone else, to even have to still be here.
Or even that it's a historical moment. It's taken a long time.
It's the surprising element of that. It's taken this long. And that's why it's so emotional.
And I wonder if referendums rarely work, I wonder if how this one will go. That's what I wonder. I mean, it's taken them this long just to agree, the government to agree on this specific question.
That's why it's so sad, yeah. Well, let's see how that pans out.
Yeah, let's see. What would you do? And this is one that I kind of made up. I didn't really make it up, as in the reason I'm bringing it to what would you do is because it's happened to me recently. And I would like to discuss with a smart lady like yourself firstly, what you think and how you respond to this comment. So conversation about hiring, having more diversity in the workplace, or, developing people so that you have more diversity in the decision-making roles in a big organization, right? And when I say more diversity, I mean more women, people from different cultural backgrounds, different ethnicities, genders, so on. And especially when it's very monocultural, right? This is what I'm talking about. So you've got diversity measures, right? And it might be positive discrimination, it might be hiring practices. How you do it doesn't matter, okay? The point is the organization wants to put something in, or there's a body that wants to encourage that practice within companies and organizations. Now, the person who's responsible for hiring people is saying, we hire on merit and that's all that matters. We hire on merit. So we're not going to go out and specifically targeting women or specifically targeting minorities, or because we hire on merit and that's how it should be. What would you do? Or what would you say?
That's an interesting one, because recruitment or the fulfilling of a role is on merit. It's about, can an individual do this job? It's not about, can this individual who is female, who is black, who is brown, who is red, do this job? It's about, there's a job, it needs to be done. Who is the best person for that job? So that's, as I'm hearing it, and I could be wrong here, as I'm understanding this, that's what the response is from this HR manager, is that we hire on merit, that's it. What I'm also hearing is that there's an attempt at targeting unconscious bias. In this particular situation, it is, for me, I hire on merit. Now, it's difficult to measure if recruitment is being based on merit, because you have, looking at the group that apply for that particular job, that's what it's dependent on. There are some jobs where it just so happens that there is no talent pool of females or people of color. That may just happen, and that's not down to any recruitment strategy. Yes, in a lot of recruitment strategies, which I've actually seen in job searches, they have lines, they have paragraphs around encouraging people of different communities to apply. And they may even have a hiring manager being of female and of a certain background to help encourage applications. That's what I've seen. But when it comes to the selection criteria, the selection criteria is based on merit. So I can see it from both points. In this particular situation, that, what would you do? I would look at the selection criteria, the talent pool of the job, or jobs. And based on that, yes, I would select, it's based on merit. However, I think if it's about putting in place some kind of clause or some kind of program or some kind of documentation which targets unconscious bias, that's very difficult to do, because whatever clause is put in place will not determine what selection criteria you end up with. So I would have to err on the side of the HR manager who said, well, the selection is based on merit, and what impact would a clause do? What impact would a clause have on the talent pool being created more diverse?
What if it's not necessarily, because this was not about a specific clause. So what if it's essentially going, right, let me look at my organization. All right, all my senior leaders are men. All my middle managers are men. There's a few women, maybe 20% of women. And then my workforce is monocultural, right? I'm a leader with vision. I believe, this is what this leader believes, I believe that to succeed in the future, we need more diverse ideas. So we need more diverse people from more diverse backgrounds and lived experiences. So this company to have a future, which means I actively want to have more females. Maybe I want to target 50%, maybe too woke, 50% maybe, but I've only got 20%. So maybe I want to type by next year, I want to have 30%. Let's just go there, right? How do I attract talent from people from different backgrounds, cultures, experience, lived experience? How does my company attract? This is what I want to put in place. It's not saying you only hire that person because they're Black, or you only hire that person because they're a woman, or you only hire that person because they're gay. It's saying, how do I attract the diverse talent? Because the fact is, whatever you're doing isn't working. If that's your vision, and some people, it might not be their vision, so that's fine. And if that's your vision, whatever you're doing is not working. So how do you attract diverse talent? Yes, you can hire on merit, but if you're telling me every person that turns up for the job is a white male, then what can you do to change that? And you might not know all the answers.
This HR, I think for the HR manager, maybe again, I'm probably deep diving into this. HR manager, when we're saying about we're hiring based on merit,
yeah,
merit also includes that vision in the sense that, like, for example, again, and it relates back to the sports scenario where all women and all men, they're all different, right? In the same way that just because you hire based on color or gender doesn't necessarily mean that you get physical representation, but you may not get a voice of representation. So for example, you could have female leaders, but that female leader may not necessarily encourage other females. They may be very male skewed. In the same way that you may hire somebody of an Indian background, but they don't champion their own background. They don't champion their community or what it stands for. They're basically living a different lifestyle. And so I've been in situations where I've been in a company where there's been white female department leaders. Unfortunately, those white female leaders, their mindset, their work output was championing and voicing and representing different communities. Now, that's a great example of, even if it doesn't matter what, I understand the vision, in terms of vision, what you see, you're representing, and if you see it out there, then obviously you can become it too. But it's not that particular vision, that's not just based on just seeing it. That's because there's merit there.
It's doing the actions as well. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
And so that's what the HR manager is talking about. And in terms of, yes, we're doing it on merit. If there is, in that example that you mentioned about, if there is a company and all you can see is white male leaders in the executive leadership team, then it's a case of deep diving and saying, okay, what do those male leaders have which none of our other workforce have? What's going on here? Are we giving training sessions just to the leadership team, or are we not giving mentorship opportunities to the rest of our team, that's more internal rather than attraction of coming on board and attract and assuming, again, it's an assumption that if we had 30% of female or coloured leadership managers, that means it would help us in the future, because you could have 30%, you could hire 30% female and coloured individuals and put them in leadership positions. But if they don't necessarily champion exactly what your vision is, then it's a failure. You may as well just go back to having white.
Okay, absolutely. But then that would be one of your categories, wouldn't it? If you had selection criteria for people, they'd have to demonstrate that they could do that and would do that.
And that's what I was saying about it based on merit.
Yeah.
So that in terms of the interview process, it still goes back to your talent pool. You can have a job and you could have 10 shortlisted candidates for 10 applicants for the job, and they could all be 10 white males. If it's a vision about inclusion and diversity, then one of the questions in our interview based on merit too would also be on diversity, targeted to those 10 applicants. If there was a vision where there is physical representation, then it would be a case of, okay, looking at the recruitment strategies and going, okay, in order to attract the talent pool, in order to attract females and people of color to apply for these jobs, what could we do? Shall we put a face of HR as a female and of a colored individual? Can we put in a sentence or paragraph? That's basically that. But there also needs to be like, okay, well, what is, but at the interview process, applicant of whatever background they are needs to then, it's up to them to then express how would they feed into the vision of diversity and inclusion. And that can come from a white male or a white female or a black female or an Indian man or an Indian female or whoever.
Absolutely.
And that's why the HR manager said merit.
Right. Okay. So, well, what I got from this HR person, well, they weren't a HR person, it doesn't matter, is they didn't see the need for those types of initiatives where you say, you know, if you want to attract, you know, visibly diverse talent, that you put in the ad a picture of someone who's, you know, a person of color, or you put a line in the, they don't need that because you just, people apply and you hire on merit. So that's kind of what, you know, what we were getting at here. The need for those types of initiatives to attract more diverse talent.
Those initiatives, they're not just applicable to recruitment, they're applicable to how a company present themselves in the marketplace.
Oh, I know, but I'm just saying this is just a perspective that we don't need anything extra. We don't need to change how, we just need people to apply and select on merit. Yeah, and then to me, that's ignoring the fact that we have biases, unconscious bias. To me, that's not acknowledging unconscious bias and also not acknowledging the challenges of some of the underrepresented to one, apply, and two, climb the ladder. It's not acknowledging that they exist despite the research and the result that we have. That's dismissing that. But everything you said was right.
In terms of a selection criteria, yes, based on merit, regardless of what background you're from. In terms of the message you're sending, in terms of a message a company is sending out there, regardless of recruitment, in any applicable scenario, it's how the company wish to present themselves as an organization. You know, that comes down to, so that initiative is really down to the values of that company and how they want to present themselves as a company.
Yeah, absolutely. Good. It helped me think about how I would react to that.
Yeah, I enjoyed that. There's some controversial kind of issues there.
Yeah, I don't know if they're controversial, really. It's just, there's always going to be different opinions. There's always going to be people who don't agree with your opinion, and that's fine. And with the merit thing, I don't know how, I'm really uncomfortable with the suggestion that to hire diverse talent means you're reducing your standards of merit and what's acceptable for jobs. That's what I hear when people bang on about merit. I was like, well, are you saying that they don't have merit? Unless you're hiring someone just because they're black and they're rubbish at their job, then that's not what it's about. Or just because they're gay, or just because they're a woman, because you want to tick some boxes, then that's not what it's about. But there are always going to be people that believe that in the workplace, whether that was the reason or not.
Right.
When we talk about hiring on merit, that is how it should be.
Yeah, of course. I'm not disagreeing with that.
No, I'm not saying you are. I'm just making a point. When that point is made, when you're having a conversation about diverse teams and bringing more diverse talent pool, and the argument for pro-diversity initiatives, right? So it's the pro-diversity initiatives, and the goal is to get more diversity. And then it's, well, what can we do differently, or what do we need to do? And when merit comes up as a pushback, then the suggestion is that you're going to be doing things that are hiring people that aren't fit for the job. Well, why would you be doing that?
There is that, but again, it's an assumption that they're thinking that merit doesn't. There's an assumption that we're hiding behind merit.
It's interesting, isn't it? All right, I think we've only got time for that. We did quite well there. I'd love to know what other people think, because people would have been in that position. There would be people in that position, whether it's their job, where they have to get on board diversity, equality, inclusion measures in the workplace. How do you feel about that? Is it align with you? Do you feel like it's just a tick box? Or do you feel like it works? What works? What doesn't work? How does it sit with you? Interested to hear.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, that's all we've got time for. Thank you, Bhavna, for being a wonderful host as usual, and sharing your opinions, thoughts, ideas, and experiences.
Yeah, I'm glad I could.
And I will speak to you soon.
Have a great week.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.